Welcome to Command Control Power, a weekly podcast hosted by 3 certified members of the Apple Consultants Network, drawing from over half a century of combined experience. We talk shop, interview vendors and colleagues, and share what we've learned while operating our technology consulting practices. Visit commandcontrolpower.com for show notes and click support to join our community for exclusive access to patron-only episodes, special features, merchandise, and other membership perks. This is Joe Saponari of SciMac, and my 2 co-hosts are Jerry Zigman of MacWorks and Sam Valencia of the HCS Technology Group. Thanks for listening. So guys, it's still early January as we speak here. Feels a little fresh off the kind of holiday time frame. One of the things right before the end of the year and kind of lingering into the beginning of this year was the latest and greatest security debacle of 2021, the Log4j vulnerability. This was noticed, I'm going from memory, I think it was like December 9th. People found the first instances of it were like a week or 10 days prior. So it's one of these things where you kind of wonder, like, how long, has this been known? How long has this been exploited? It was a 0 day, and it was a kind of a hurry up and patch kind of scenario. And it wasn't the first one of last year. It affected a lot of software. One day I was doing a migration, setting up a client machine and finishing the migration. And one of the tasks was to inherit the Backblaze license or migrate Backblaze essentially. So uninstall Backblaze on the old system, uninstall on the new system, and then reinstall and then inherit the previous instance. So it kept failing. Couldn't inherit. I'm like, what's going wrong? Go to backblaze.com. Page is down. Totally down. You can't get to Backblaze. Credit to them for taking down the site while it still had vulnerabilities. They took it offline, which is the right move. But it was pretty, impressive to see that, like, wow, this is affecting a lot of our software that we use every day, whether it had been actively exploited or, these vendors all had to quickly assess whether they were affected and we respond accordingly. The other example, of course, was UniFi. We had a scramble when we found Log4j, did in fact affect UniFi. They came out with an update to the controller. Again, going from memory, it was like 6.5.4 or 6.5.5.4, something like that. That patch came out. I dove in basically for my machines, for all of my sites, installed all those controller updates. And it was kind of like client interruption be damned. Like, I tried to do it after hours for most people, but some of these controllers are running on like a Dream Machine or Dream Machine Pro where it's integrated and the device itself has to reboot. And I thought, maybe that's going to bring Wi-Fi down if there's an integrated access point, for example. So I just did it. We had to do it. It's like extenuating circumstances. Of course, then like 2 days later, I found actually there's still lingering issues in UniFi. They had to go to the 6.5.5 version or whatever the next one was. So we got that deployed like shortly thereafter. It caused me to go through all of my UniFi sites one by one, save the backup configuration locally, and then of course do the update. I had, I think, 1 site, maybe 2, fail to update properly and like failed to start the network app. And I tried a lot of interventions that we've learned through troubleshooting UniFi and ending up having to connect using SSH, factory reset the controller, and then reapply a backup file. I had a few like that, but basically like through this process, I thought this is great. I've got updated backups for every single site now because I had to go through them one by one, and I've got them all fully patched. At one point, a lot of my controllers were like going offline and coming back. Did you guys see this effect over the course of a few days and sometime in December, maybe early January?
After you applied the update, this was happening.
I think it was happening until the 6.5.5, like the latest. In a few of my cases where it was still intermittently going offline, I had to either reboot the controller. I'm not positive, but I know for a while, I think it was affected. Now, Jerry, I think you saw this. Was this affected when the issue was occurring or when some Amazon services were down or something like that?
I saw this in the cloud portal where they were clearly working on it for several days. So the individual client instances would be available, then you would try to connect to it and you wouldn't be able to connect, and then it would come back up and you might get in, you might get to the controller and you might be able to fire off an update. But I think it was less about the update, more about the Log4j that everybody was trying to reconcile with and deal with during that time period. Even if you did have remote access to the computer, there's different ways, of course, that we access computers these days. We have clients on the network that are running Adigy. Of course, you could remote in and you could probably get to the controller that way using live desktop through Adigy. But there's something to be said here for maybe putting on a VPN instance for the admin on all these Ubiquiti UniFi installations so that if something does go down through the cloud portal, you're still able to get on pretty quickly.
That was a great pro tip, that you suggested. And in the one or two cases where I had something, a controller fail to apply the update or like fail to restart the network app in the controller or whatever, I did have VPN access already, just coincidentally, because I needed it or they use it or whatever. And so I was able to go in and just connect using SSH to the controller because it'll still respond to that, even though it's not like starting the app where you can get in through the portal. You can still get into the controller locally or even like via the web interface using the local IP address. There are a few different ways you have to get in. And I was able to use that. But of course, the trouble is, you can't set up VPN if you don't have access to the controller. It is a good tip to say, like, go through and really like get access that way, just in case you need it someday.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to set up. L2TP VPN is a couple button clicks away. So it's not some long process of having to create policies, and it's very simple.
Speaking of VPN, for the longest time, when we've configured access to like a Mac OS server VPN or even actually, I don't remember if it was through a Mac OS server running VPN. I know to like a Zywall firewall, which, wow, blast from the past, haven't used those in forever. These days to a UniFi gateway, when we connect, using L2TP over IPsec VPN, client to site VPN, we configure send all traffic over the VPN because I guess there's no way over that type of VPN connection for the VPN server to like specify the default route when it's on a different IP address schema. So because the VPN clients will get addresses in say like the 192.168.5.x, range when, whereas the local clients are on the 192.168.4. whatever range, there's no way to like actually reach the remote clients unless you say send all traffic over the VPN. I think there's a concept of like a split tunnel VPN. And I don't know if that's like something that UniFi has to support. I mean, I imagine, Sam, you may have dealt with this on like the Sonic Wall side or something, but like, do you guys know if there's a best practice for connecting a VPN, configuring a VPN where you might have a lot of remote users and you might not want to send all traffic for all users over the VPN pipe?
I think we're talking the same language, but that setting that we're talking about isn't on by default, right? So on the Mac OS client side, at least, so you don't have to send all traffic over the VPN. It all depends, I guess, on what you want the security ramifications to be for that end user. Like, do you want to make sure that everything that they do is sent through that traffic, or does that create a burden on the local network that the employees are then using over there?
It does when you have a upstream pipe of like 30 megabits like Optimum provides locally, where you have remote users connecting and like all their requests are going out, over the office VPN connection. That's definitely a problem. But that's actually a great point, though. I mean, if you have a situation where you want to filter all traffic, maybe the firewall that you run, your internet security appliance running on UniFi, say, you may want to send all traffic in those cases, but I found that that's necessary to route traffic to the VPN side of things, to like the remote clients, again, like on the LAN at the client site, let's say. If you want to get to the client server remotely, if you're still running like on-premises servers, and you want to get to it over the VPN, because the VPN clients have an IP address on a different subnet, that traffic is not routed automatically over the VPN. So I think you need to like specify a route. And I don't know if there's a way to do that in UniFi. I don't know if that would be done on the client side or on the UniFi server side. Question, like, I feel like I should know the answer to, but the simple solution is just send all traffic and then it works. But again, it's not scalable above a certain number of users to do it that way.
There are a lot of different VPN solutions. You mentioned split tunnel and on-demand VPN, and like all depending on the capacity of the internal network and what it can handle and how extremely secure you really want to enforce on the client. So you could be like, hey, you should connect to VPN. It's nice, it's good, but you don't force them to. Mm-hmm. But that leads them to, when they're at Starbucks, not properly securing their data because they forgot.
Right. Did you guys read that story of the UniFi guy? Like, remember that data breach from like the end of 2020, I think it was, and everybody was, what happened to UniFi? They had this like security issue, and it turned out that it was somebody on the inside, one of their engineers who like tried to exfiltrate data and like sell it or something. Man. The way he got caught was his VPN disconnected at one point, and his actual home IP address was exposed to the UniFi network where he was accessing the internal resources. His home internet connection went down and came back up. And so when it came back up, I guess the VPN hadn't reconnected quickly enough. And so he was connected to the UniFi resources, which logged his home IP address for that couple minutes. So
I bet he was on Optimum.
Exactly. Yeah. That would check out.
Son of a gun. Wow, what a way to get caught.
I
And your
know.
ISP goes down for a minute and you're
Right.
pinched.
I know. We're lucky. I mean, they must be feeling like pretty lucky that that happened to catch the guy. They may not have otherwise had like evidence about it.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah, it's wild.
On the whole discussion of the UniFi controllers, I've mentioned before on the show that I have a Mac Mini that we have a whole bunch of sites on, and we've moved to UDM Pros for a lot of customers too, but we still got a decent bit of many different of our client sites on this Mac Mini that's been running like a charm. We originally years ago thought about going to like Mac Mini Colo or Mac Stadium and something like that. We ended up hosting it locally. So anyway, Log4j comes around. We're looking to create an update schedule. Matt on my team's like, hey, I can't get into the UniFi Mini. I'm using Splash Top. Can't get into it. I can't get into it either. And this is in New York where it is. So I asked someone to take a look. Oh, it was off. I was like, oh, that's weird. Yeah, turn it back on. That's super strange. Why isn't like power cycling after a failure or whatever like it's supposed to? Fire it up, and it's just stuck at the booting screen. It's stuck at the Apple logo with the progress bar and just won't go beyond that. So I had him take it back, troubleshoot it. Come to find out that the hard drive just up and died. The one Mac Mini that's hosting all of my client UniFi sites.
Oh, man.
It's just tanked. Yeah, thankfully, on top of it doing like auto backups, I actually go in there. I do say once a month, but sometimes it's more like 40 days, 45 days. I go in there and I perform a backup, all the data, and I take it off and I store it off-site. Thankfully, we had that. We had to go through the process of ordering a new Mac Mini, getting it delivered, setting it up, putting the restore file back on there and restoring it from backup. As we suspected, everything came back. I think that there was like a 3-week gap that we missed. So like we added a gateway and we took away 2 sites. So there were some minor changes we had to just account for because in the time where the backup was taken versus when it went down, but it was really pretty minimal. And so we were thankfully in a good place. The one thing that I didn't mention is when it did go down and when we were troubleshooting it, of course you have backups, right? But I would always feel better if we can get the data from the drive and just use what's there. As my guy was trying to copy data off, the one file or one folder, I should say, that kept doing I/O errors was the folder with the UniFi data. It was just like, nope, could not be read or written. That old school language when you would copy data off. So thankfully we had the backup and we're all good. But that happened to us right in the midst of all of this. It was one of those projects that was like, I remember hearing it from Ramey Kramer's on the show. That's a great idea. We can do that and make money off of it. And I set up an old Mac Mini to do it. And it turned into something that I didn't expect. It expanded from there. Thankfully, we had a manual backup. It could have been worse.
Like Joe or I could get together with you and we can go over your installations and talk about best practice. If
I know. It's like cobbler's son has no shoes, man. Tell your customers all this stuff. But I had this, and this Mac Mini was super old. I mean, it had a spinning disc.
Wow.
When you said hard drive, I was like, I was going to circle back to that. Was it really hard drive?
Yeah, it had a spinning disc. I mean, like, I'm sure like everyone listening to the show right now is just going, what the hell, Sam? What's your problem?
I feel relief when I hear stories like this. I love when people share stuff like this because it just reminds me I'm not the only one that like sometimes has gaps in my systems,
Yeah.
And the cobbler's kit situation where it's like, my stuff sometimes is like the least maintained. I mean, I've been better lately, but yeah, that everybody can fall prey to that. When this stuff fails, it's really devastating to not have insight. I've had client ubiquity stuff like have problems. And when we can't connect remotely through the portal for whatever reason, either because they're down or the one site is down, or because like, let's say the site gateway failed or the cloud key failed, we have no insight into what the heck they even have going on over there. I don't remember how many access points there are, I rely on the portal to tell me that. So I'm flying blind at that point, even though I have backups in a best case scenario, they're up to date enough and everything. I lose kind of the insight that I have thanks to the tools, if I don't have that. And I don't think there's really a way to replace it other than just manually taking screenshots to jog your own memory, really.
One other thing, too, with the Ubiquity software schedule, it seems like every 3rd day or 4th day, they come out with an update. One school of thought that says, oh, well, you don't want to update all the time. But they have this protocol where something is a candidate for release and then they'll finally release it. And they have made mistakes along the way, but there's something really compelling about trying to keep up with the Ubiquity updates as they sort of progress along. I have run into little snafus, and I know Sam and I have talked about this off mic, where you haven't updated a controller or maybe an access point, and then you're maybe jumping a couple versions or a couple point releases forward, and it doesn't always gracefully update if you're jumping versions. I think there's an argument to be made to try to stay with the update cycle with the UniFi products specifically.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I'll circle back to what seems pretty obvious to me. I wonder if there's a reason why more vendors don't do this, or at least any vendors, in my experience. I don't think I've seen this ever, but there's a beta track, that's fine. I'm going to avoid that. I leave that to you, Jerry. I know you like to embrace the betas, more than
alpha
than the rest
track
of us.
too.
Alpha, beta, whatever it takes. But then, and then there's like the public release track. And like, so I don't want to be on the beta. I don't want to be on the cutting edge. I don't want to be a beta tester, by definition. I certainly don't want my clients to be, nor do I want my clients to be like the first public people to install, in this case, let's say just even the UniFi controller updates. But I would love for them to be updated 2 weeks after, or maybe 1 week after is like the best hedge against a 0-day vulnerability. Therefore, you have only 7 days of exposure, I guess, in that situation, rather than like waiting indefinitely. But that's certainly going to stay much more up to date than probably I'm able to keep all of my clients manually. I don't want to be the first person. I don't want my clients to be the first people to install the public software either, because there are issues that slip through. I'll end up looking up an issue, landing on UniFi's community, seeing a post from UI Glenn saying, oh, like, here's how you fix this known issue that we discovered 6 hours after the public release. It turns out the network app won't start. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's like only 1% of their customers, or it's 0.1%, or who knows. But it affects one of my clients or a few of my clients or whatever randomly. Here's how you fix that. You just have to go into the site and do this manual thing and like refresh and restore from backup or whatever, or run these commands. I don't want that agita. I don't want to have to worry about something not being accessible. And did I brick something? Am I going to have to go there on site tomorrow? That kind of thing. I'd rather just like let them figure out the problems, let them either pull the public update or post the solution before the issue occurs. So I would sign up for the public release +7 release cycle. That should be an option.
Duly noted.
All right, enough about UniFi for now. I'd like to take a moment to thank a few new supporters of Command Control Power. We have a new flagship supporter, Collide, collide.co. That's KOLIDE.co. Kind of new on our radar, very interested in what they were doing. Specifically, I'd actually recommend checking out honest.security. So this is a white paper released by Collide, honest.security. So that's the URL. And it's a whole conversation basically about honest security and what that means for you, as the consultant, and for our end users. It's a new way, really. It's a very refreshing way of looking at endpoint security and having conversations with end users about security. And I think it's a really important topic. It's usually kind of this top-down thing that we do following certain protocols where we enforce certain policies, and there isn't a lot of visibility to the user about why and how that's done and what we're doing and things like that. And the way that users end up thinking about consultants is that annoying person who stops them from functioning properly sometime, throwing up an error message or a dialog box, or preventing them from doing something they need to do or would like to do, preventing them from installing software they want to install. And, we may think we have our reasons for doing that, but I think if you read this paper from Collide, Honest Security, it gives a really good approach to how to understand, like, from both sides, how to have that conversation, that relationship, and Collide helps you achieve it. So I would just call anyone's attention to Collide. I was really impressed with looking at how they actually operate, how they enforce or apply policies. They communicate with users through Slack about what issues there might be, and also about how to remediate those issues, letting the user know what they're doing. So check out Honest Security and also check out Collide.com. And thank you very much to Collide for sponsoring Command Control Power. So in a recent episode, I was talking about how one of my clients has this Wi-Fi issue, UniFi network. The access point is in wireless mesh mode. It's an AC HD access point. hanging off of that was a Sonos box, and he started having issues where that whole segment would go offline. So that wireless mesh access point would go offline, Sonos would go offline. My suspicion was that Sonos was malfunctioning, or like that the port built into the Sonos was thinking it should start acting like uplink port, like provide a connection to downstream devices, causing the access point to think it had an uplink over the wire, and then like therefore stop using the wireless mesh connection. I've seen a lot of issues with Sonos devices over the years, and I posted about a different client network in Slack, and Jerry was quick to respond asking, do I have any Sonos in the mix here? My question on Slack about this other network was that randomly on a different client's network, the PoE switch shows that a port is being blocked due to STP, spanning tree protocol. I wasn't even aware of any Sonos connected to the switch. Didn't even come to mind that maybe this is the same issue that I've seen before with Sonos basically causing a port to be blocked. What was weird here was that like we had a week prior, we had port 2 being blocked due to STP protocol. And we unplugged that device thinking, well, this isn't helping anybody. Let's just unplug it, because they didn't even notice any device that was going offline due to the port being blocked. And so we just unplugged the device physically. No sooner had we done that than we see the following week an alert about port 5 on the same switch being blocked for the same reason. I'm trying to figure out like what's going on over there. So Jerry, you're right on the money, I think, with Sonos. You were asking, are there any Sonos Bridge devices in the mix? Good thought, because this is something I've seen before. Sure enough, they do have Sonos. Then coincidentally heard from a third client who was saying, right now our network is like really bad. It's really slow. There's certain areas of the house where you can't even get a signal. When we are connected, it seems much slower than usual. I don't know what's going on. And with this particular client, this has happened before. And it hasn't happened in a long time, but it happened before. And we tried everything, tweaking UniFi, trying to just figure out like what the key problem was. And we made some little adjustments, and basically I thought had fixed it for this client. And this was like over a year ago. I don't know what the sort of fix was, because we tried a lot of different little things, and it just overall was much improved, and they were happy and they were fine basically until now. And I said, I'm looking into this issue. Do me a favor and try this just on a whim here. I knew this client had Sonos. I said, unplug all the Sonos boxes. They're all in the network rack, the equipment rack where they have audio equipment and unified equipment and Synology, things like that. This is a residential client that has a home office. Try unplugging all the Sonos boxes from power, just to give it a try. Let's see if this works. He wrote back, sure enough, the network has been 100% great since unplugging all the Sonos boxes. There's my answer, and basically that's the answer probably in 3 cases. Yeah, mic drop. Take them out of the rack.
Just an interjection. These are Sonos, the old Sonos Bridge.
I don't know in this case which device they are exactly. I probably should get more specific in all 3 cases. I know that in the first case I mentioned just earlier, that is a Sonos, I think, generation 1 device, an S1 or whatever device. I don't know exactly which model. On the other 2 networks, I don't know. I did a deep dive after this client said, yeah, this is working. And I did a lot of research. So a couple of people on Slack mentioned, yes, Sonos, spanning tree, blah, 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 like kind of validating like this is an issue. So I did a lot of searching. I found some pretty definitive posts in the Sonos community and also in the UniFi community. The bottom line is it seems like, so if you have a device, and it could be a Bridge, or maybe this is specific to the Bridge, I'm not sure, maybe it's other devices as well. If it has the ability to connect wirelessly and wired, turn off wireless in the device. So if it's plugged in, to the wired network, you don't also want a Wi-Fi connection, even though, you'd think that a device should prioritize the wired port, not kind of have the wireless component interfere. It's not clear to me if this is the same issue as the STP issue. I don't know much about STP, but basically the STP issue with Sonos is that there's 100 megabit ports built into the Sonos models, and maybe this is the old ones only. Sonos assigns a non-standard cost, an STP port cost for those ports, which depending on the network can affect whether that port gets a link. And so it would then use Wi-Fi instead because of that port cost on the built-in ports. If Sonos then uses the Wi-Fi connection as the default, I think it might route the non-audio traffic out, basically bridging the Wi-Fi to the wired network inside the Sonos, in the Sonos box. So it essentially becomes like a wireless bridge, which is really bad because it's plugged into your network. You might want a device to be a wireless bridge if, like, say, a printer doesn't have Wi-Fi built in, and you plug in like an access point that can act as a wireless bridge to give the printer a wired link. In that scenario, the wired connection is not also looping back into your network. Whereas in the Sonos situation, if it's acting as a wireless bridge, it also has a wired link to your network, and therefore it's creating a loop back. So I think that that's kind of the issue that I've been seeing over the years. So it's not clear to me if that's exactly what's happening, but basically the best practice is turn off Wi-Fi on the Sonos devices that are wired. That's kind of the bottom line recommendation.
I've admitted before to not knowing that much about Sonos, but I know it's a pain in the when it can be. And I ran into that issue similarly, Joe, in another customer where there was STP, the spanning tree protocol issue, and there was also that built-in wireless of the Sonos devices. And I spent like a good solid half a day trying to sort that out before I had some assistance in getting it done. But I'm glad you're in better shape, but I've definitely dealt with those issues before. I know that situation all too well.
There's also Sonos devices that have wireless only connections. That's fine. So if you have some Sonos devices that, are wireless, it's best these days to connect them to Wi-Fi. There's an older technology, I guess, like a proprietary Sonos net, where like one Sonos box could be hardwired to your system and then can provide a wireless technology to other Sonos devices that don't have a wired connection. So it's like a Sonos mesh kind of thing that's bridged to your network, by one of your Sonos devices. So if you have wireless Sonos devices, they should probably just be configured to join your Wi-Fi network like any other wireless device. If you have a Sonos device that joins using that Sonos Net protocol, you could enable Wi-Fi on one of your bridges that's close to the device that needs the wireless connection. So you have a Sonos box that has wired connection. You can enable the wireless on that to provide it to one of your wireless only Sonos devices if needed. But again, I think it's just better if they're wired only. You can turn off Wi-Fi. You can do that in the app now for the newer generation products. I'm not sure about the old ones. Supposedly there's also like a web interface to turn it off on the older devices, but turn off wireless. And then, for the wireless ones, just connect by Wi-Fi. So yeah, I think that's probably the simplest possible solution. Otherwise, it seems like they just cause intermittent issues, and I'm not sure why sometimes they do, and power cycling them doesn't necessarily solve it in those cases.
They would prefer their own network above all others, so it causes some level of interference where they don't want to communicate properly.
As I'm listening to this, I think a lot of those problems are these original Sonos bridges, the white boxes that typically sit in an AV cabinet that provide amplification to speakers throughout a house. And of course, Sonos has come out with newer gen products, and those Sonos bridges, they don't even sell anymore. And so interestingly, their new replacement product, and you could look this up on their website, is something called a Sonos Amp. And it actually physically, the footprint is a little bit different. It's a little bit wider, it's black, it's a very low profile. And as you're telling the story, Joe, I forgot I even had this experience, which is definitely dovetailing off of everything you've talked about. So my client had this multifunction AV receiver that just wasn't working for her, but she had tons of speakers throughout her house that she wanted to power, and she wanted to control it from her iPhone. This has been giving you problems, and you always reach out to us, and you press the wrong button inadvertently, and all of a sudden you lose half your banks of speakers and they're not playing anymore. I said, let's just take all this stuff, let's make it all go away, and let's just put in these Sonos amps. So the way it worked for her was she actually needed 4 of them, and they weren't inexpensive. They're $700 a piece. Each Sonos amp powers 4 speakers. We had to wait a long time, and finally we didn't get them actually directly from the Sonos site. We got them from a AV distributor here in the US called Crutchfield. And on the back of these Sonos amps, there's 2 Ethernet ports. So one makes sense. One obviously comes from your router, powers number 1. And you would think what you would do is you daisy chain to the other Sonos amps. So that's originally how I set up these 4 Sonos amps. And I was having problems getting the speakers to play. They would sometimes play and then they would go away and I'd lose the zone, and it was driving me absolutely bananas. I had eureka moment on site, and I'm there for a while, and I've been spending a little bit of time with this, and I'm really getting frustrated. I factory reset them all. I hooked up the first one to Ethernet, and then the other 3 just connected via Wi-Fi, and they were literally right next to one another. So it could have been very easy to hook them all up via Ethernet, and that would be the way you would think, doing the jobs that we do, this is what would make sense to us. It's not the way Sonos works or is wired. The other 3 amps were connected via Wi-Fi, and everything's worked flawlessly since.
Yeah, a couple of people in the Slack also said the same thing. Basically, they're just all Wi-Fi, and it works. It is kind of like annoying that Sonos doesn't just play nicely with the network. I mean, this is such a common thing to want to have in a house. A lot of people like to have this. It gets plugged into the network, and then it should be stable that way. But conversely, if you plug it in, it actually makes things worse. So it's really surprising. But I think I'm starting to get to the bottom of it. In that original network that I mentioned, where they had the wireless mesh access point that kept cycling offline or just intermittently dropping connections and stuff, with the Sonos kind of hanging off of it, we had them install a wire. Jerry, you coordinated that for our client because you have a great wiring contractor in the state who took care of it, did a great job routing the cable from upstairs on the second floor down to like another part of the house on the ground level, getting that wireless access point to have a wired connection. And so I figured, that's going to make everything very stable and that should solve the issue. And so far, I haven't heard it otherwise. But I realized in the meantime, the rest of these issues, which is that even if you have a wired connection to the access point, to the Sonos, to whatever else, the Sonos itself can still cause issues. So it may be that the underlying issues may not be resolved by this. And I actually let the client know up front, you may need to upgrade your Sonos, but I think either way, we should have a wired connection there, a wired backbone. So let's start there, and then we'll see how it goes. And if it's not totally stable, we'll recommend your AV person install a new Sonos device, because I guess the latest model, seems to have better control over this, at least. Like you can turn off the Wi-Fi if you have the wired connection, and that's a supportable sort of configuration.
Yeah, he would get a Sonos amp in that case for $700. And the only way you can disable wireless is not through going to some sort of a local website. You do it on the iPhone through the iOS app.
Right.
Go
I
figure.
think that the S2 app supports that. I don't think that's part of the S1, system.
Correct.
Or whatever. I think
Right.
you had to do it through
Yes.
the web that way. Yeah.
Yeah, don't tell Sam about the wiring guy, though, by the way.
Yeah, what's this
VR
wiring guy
secret.
you speak of?
I can't tell you.
It's so good to find like good people though. When we had this good outcome, he was willing to like show up for the client. He had to go back a second time because found that he couldn't quite route the cable himself. He had to bring somebody else on site to actually help like fish the cable. And he had a plan B at that point. He said, if that doesn't work, if I really can't find a path, I know what I can do is like repurpose the coaxial cable that's going from the downstairs to the upstairs and actually use Mocha, basically putting like Ethernet over coaxial. And then like moving the modem, like he was like ready to, with a whole plan B in case it didn't work. So I felt like he really put the effort into taking care of the client and, wanting the outcome to be favorable for everybody. Why does that sound so rare? It's great when you find somebody like that. So kudos to you, Jerry, for bringing him into the fold.
Who's sending me a name here? Who's sending me a V card? With info?
Jerry's.
His name is Mark.
Yeah, you can find him. Just Mark, Connecticut. You'll find him.
So before the holidays, I had a elderly client approach me, and she's been a long-standing client. She was the CEO of her business, and she sold the business, and now we just provide residential support to her and her husband. So she, knows her way around Macs, and I've gone through maybe 5 or 6 different Macs since the time that I've worked with her. So it's been a number of years. Without consulting with me, she went to the Apple Store when the Apple Store was open. Somebody sold her a top-of-the-line iPad with a keyboard. She made an on-site session with me where I provided some on-site support to just work out some of the kinks of her using this iPad with the keyboard. She was compelled to buy it. The salesperson gave them the spiel about how great the iPad is, and you put it with a keyboard, and it's like, it's your computer, but it's better because it's portable, and it's this, and it's that. So I kind of said to her nicely and very gently, I said, geez, I really wish we could have talked about this a little bit more because, to be honest with you, you're going to have some workflow limitations or little hoops that you need to jump through to be able to edit your documents, your Word documents. You're going to have to decide whether you're going to use OneDrive or you're going to use Dropbox. And then if you want to open the file from Dropbox in Microsoft Word on the iPad, you've got to run through these little chicanes or these little gateways to get there. And then you want to save the document. And it's not drop-down menu, select save, and magically it's saved and then it's there on your laptop. as we all know, it's not quite that easy and straightforward. Put this in pretty nice terms to her, so I don't think she was offended by anything I said. Not so surprisingly, a couple months later, she says, I wish I had listened to you. I wish we had consulted before me buying this, because I really can't do the things that I wanted to do. And so I just wanted to throw it out there to you guys. Do you think there's an unfulfilled promise that the iPad doesn't deliver on? These client expectations, they go to the store and they think that they need this, or they think it's going to work in some completely different way than we all know an iPad with a keyboard will work. And it's not really a replacement for a laptop.
I have a few takes on that, I think. If you're wanting some banter out of me on this one,
I'm open to criticism, Sam.
Okay, good. First of all, I think it really depends on the use case hugely. I mean, if they're like email and web browsing, then totally
of course.
iPad. Yeah. But it also depends on how well-versed the end user is on a computer to begin with, because I think you can do a lot. You do have to make those connections. I agree with you with Word and Drop and a cloud, whether it's OneDrive or Dropbox or whatever, and that requires some help potentially. But I think there's a lot that can be done in iPad OS that doesn't warrant a computer. That's just my opinion. As I've seen more and more people use them, I think there's a lot that you can do for everyday stuff. She creates documents still, or does she just go online and do stuff there?
She may be taking notes for a foundation that she's working for, creating documents that she needs to share to other people. Someone who's sort of learned on a laptop is not going to make that leap. They really need to want it. I feel like the way the iPad is presented into somebody who's never used one before, that it is this portable computer because you could put this keyboard on it. It's really not. We talked about years ago, lean forward experience or lean back experience. And the iPad is lean back. You sit on the couch, you answer a couple emails, you watch YouTube, and you're off and running. But I don't think it's a real work tool.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Jerry. And I think I'm somewhere between you and Sam, because I do think that, like, depending on the user, there's probably a lot more use cases for the iPad as the primary device than I'm open to. I'm kind of stuck somewhere in the past as well. And I think that I constantly need to be reevaluating that. But I do tend to agree. Well, first of all, it's way different than the Mac, even though they're both Apple, even though a lot of the apps would exist for both platforms, and syncing services that are pretty mature these days, and iCloud keeps everything pretty well in sync. It's workable, and it's kind of a lateral move in some sense, but I do think it's different enough where it's almost closer to like switching from Mac to Windows, especially from the perspective of like a 70-year-old client. But even for any of my clients in their 40s and 50s, whatever, I mean, it's going to be tough, I think, for a lot of people to say, well, wait, I don't have this feature of my Mac. I mean, I guess I could have two windows up side by side, but like, it's just functionally different. I have to like learn how to implement that, how to do that. See, this is the thing. Like every time I try to explain this to a client, I find myself really struggling for the right way to communicate it. Here's the trouble I have is the actual switch from Mac to iPad. I mean, I'm all for adding an iPad. That's great. Like if you have a Mac and it's still going to be your, quote unquote primary system, it's still going to contain all your data. I can easily migrate your stuff, from your old Mac to your current Mac. That's all very simple. And then we can add an iPad just as easily as we can add a phone or replace a phone. But to replace the Mac with the iPad, to me, is a little bit less of kind of like a guaranteed outcome, because I can almost guarantee that depending on how long you've been a user, one app that you have on the Mac may not exist on the iPad. And maybe we need to like figure out what the equivalent is on the iPad. Maybe there needs to be data migration on an app level, from one service to another. Let's say you've got folders of pictures in your pictures folder, or loose pictures in your pictures folder that are not in your Photos app. Okay, like where do those end up on your iPad? The answer is they don't, So you probably need to review all the different corners of your Mac file system to ferret out all of the data that's hiding somewhere that's not like in an app, syncing through iCloud Drive or on your desktop or documents, and actually figure out what to do with it. Maybe that means just like moving it to the documents folder so it does sync up to iCloud and therefore like gets to your iPad. But then again, also maybe your Mac has more files stored on it than will fit on your new iPad. So then that stuff's just in the cloud. Are you comfortable with that? I mean, there's a lot of questions. And for somebody who's 70, I don't know that they're going to have proper answers to a lot of those questions. So for me, if I have the opportunity, I discourage people from making that kind of switch. And it sounds like that's what your client concluded after, unfortunately, already walking down pretty far down that road.
Thank you for arguing my case, Joe. This is exactly what I'm talking about. It's like this unfulfilled promise. There are people who think that they can let their computer go and they could just have this amazing portability with this iPad, and it's going to be the same thing. And it's not the same thing. I mean, our kids don't do their school assignments on an iPad with a keyboard. I mean, they could.
Some do.
Yeah.
I think this is a use case. This is a total use case, dude. I mean,
it's trying to carve a piece of marble with a blunt instrument.
In this use case, I will 100% agree with you, but I don't think it's a blanket statement that you can't move from a computer to an iPad. I just don't. There's so many cases where, depending on what they use it for, that it's an easy thing. But yeah, certainly someone that's been using a Mac for years and is set in their ways, that's like going, like Joe said, from Mac to PC. Like my father-in-law had a Windows computer for years. My mother-in-law, she only uses an iPad for her computer. And he was like, should I switch? I was like, no. Definitely not. Like,
right.
Stay there. And he agreed. He was like, okay, I'm glad you said that because I didn't want to switch. I'm like, good. Because I don't want to deal with the headache that comes with helping somebody out that is very unfamiliar after years on a PC. Right. So I think in those cases, I agree 100%. But I think there are many cases, and I just mentioned it without thinking about it. My mother-in-law is all iPad all the time. She has no other device.
Yeah, but she's not asking the question, where's my stuff?
But that's why I mean it's use case.
I just want to draw you out just a little bit more, Sam.
Yeah.
So you're saying that somebody could potentially make a transition from a computer, either a desktop computer or a laptop, and just go all in with iPad only?
I know people that have. That's why I say it's all about their use. Like it really depends on what they need it for. I mean, think of the amount of people that do very basic stuff on a computer. Like they don't need a freaking computer. Like you got Safari, you got Mail, you got Word, you got a lot of pages if they use it that they just use right from that mobile app. It works for them if they get accustomed to it. It's also about how the personality is taking in change and if they can accept that change. To Joe's case, like if they got a bunch of random files stored all over their Mac, that's not easy. That's going to suck. But that's, again, I think that's a specific case where another case might be okay to go to it.
Or in that case, they may not care as much as I do. I mean, they're asking me for the guaranteed outcome of, I want you to help me switch from this old device to this new device. And from my perspective, I'm thinking like, I don't want to be responsible for them calling me in 2 years and saying, I'm looking for the such and such files that were part of this obscure program that were on my Mac, which I now erased, and like never, that stuff never made it to the iPad. What's that?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But they may not care. They may be like, I've got my email, I've got my desktop, it's not a clean migration. I mean, there's no migration assistant going from Mac to iPad.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a writer and you go to the Apple store and you get your iPad with the keyboard and you're going to go on the French Riviera and drink cappuccino and write the great American novel and save it to OneDrive, yeah, it'll work. But day to day, if you want it to be a tool that's going to replace your laptop and you're trying to be productive on it, like I say, it's trying to carve a piece of marble with a blunt instrument.
Right. I had a writer client who called me in a panic one day after losing, hundreds of pages of his latest novel, whatever. And I go in and the file's open on screen and it shows it had not been saved and the Word document's empty. So I was like, oh man, like, what did you do? And I'm just like, let me look at recents. This is the most recent. Let me look at other backups and things. Like, what happened here? So I go back to Word and I go to the edit menu and I see the option for undo is there. So I said, undo. All of this stuff comes back.
Wow.
So he must have, he's like, I don't know what I hit. It's like probably Command A, delete, something like, so I'm just thinking like, I should like put an iPad in front of that guy. I mean, I don't know if that would be better or worse, like it's probably simpler in some ways. It just kind of saves automatically. And
oh man, that
I don't know, but
made it up.
I know. And I sometimes wonder, like, is this a test? Am I being punked right now? Like, cause this stuff is like ridiculous, and he's like, you're my savior. How did you do? I would have figured that out. I don't know, man. Like you're the one sitting there. You didn't even save this document. Like it's your novel. It's your great American novel, hundreds of pages. How did I recover this? I don't know. It's kind of a miracle that you called me now and you didn't reboot the thing first or something or whatever. I mean, I'm glad it was available, but you just can't help people. Some people, Well, as we wind down this show, one of our first of the new year, I wanted to just take this opportunity also to thank some of the newest community members here that we have in Command Control Power community. We really appreciate all of you, and just wanted to take the moment to thank the latest people joining us. We have Richard Russell of MacWorks360.com. I assume no relation to our very own Jerry Zygmunt and his MacWorks company, but Richard, thank you for your support. I'm sorry about any pronunciations that I get wrong here, just as a preface. Thierry Lorthier of SpareMac.com, Jack McCarter, Samuel Terriault, and Ted Freitas. So I probably pronounced 50% of those incorrectly, but I did my best. And we really do appreciate all of you. These are people who've joined us over the last few months. We notice every single one. We really appreciate everybody who supports us financially every month. It's very encouraging to see that we have people listening. We have people also who are voting with their dollars to support us continuing to do the show. And I'm sure it's a tired old thing that I just say all the time, but we've been doing this since 2013. I'm proud of that. I don't say that about a lot of things, but that's something we've stuck with. The three of us, all three of us, for all these years, we've been doing 450 something shows so far, week after week. So I'm proud of what we've done, and I really appreciate you guys, Sam and Jerry, for being there week after week, doing the show, doing our group therapy, as we like to call it. And I also really appreciate all of our listeners, our anonymous supporters, and the supporters I mentioned who are our newest, and all the supporters that you hear mentioned and unmentioned every week and every month.
We call those the unmentionables.
The unmentionables and dimensionables. So thank you all for your support of Command Control Power. We really appreciate it. Happy New Year, everybody. Happy 2022. I wish you all great success, and thanks for listening.
Of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I am.